Hello friends, my name is Ben Cohen. I'm the owner of Small House Farm and the founder of the Michigan Seed Library Network. Today we're going to talk a little bit about seed stories. Now as seed savers, we know how important seeds really are. We know that they're like time capsules, you know, in these little packages. They connect us to our past and they're our gateway to the future. And that's possible because of the stories, of the histories and the cultures that are inside each one of these little seeds. Now, a while ago I wrote a book. It was called From Our Seeds and Their Keepers. And when we were gathering the stories for this collection, I met a lady, her name was Sylvia. Sylvia was an elderly woman from down in Kentucky. And we talked on the phone all the time about this corn that her family grew. And you know, it was a lot of fun. We were like seed detectives. We worked with the University of Kentucky, and we were able to trace this corn 200 years, back 250 years. We traced the story of this corn back as her family traveled and carried the corn with them. And it was the history that we were able to uncover inside of that seed was just absolutely amazing. But in the time that I spent talking with Sylvia, you know, we talk about the corn, and we would talk about, she started telling me about how she remembered how her father would come home from work and how we'd work in the garden at night. And she'd tell me about how they would care for the plants, or when they would harvest the corn, how they would take it to the mill and have it milled into cornmeal, and they would pay for the cornmeal with corn. And then she started telling me about plants that her mom used to bring out of the woods to make medicine for the children when they were sick. And just stories upon stories were coming out of this seed. You know, as we started talking about the corn seed, but inside of that, we unlocked all of this history, all of this family knowledge, all of this culture and sense of place for Sylvia and her family. And then one day she says to me on the phone, she was telling me how thankful she was that I was interested in hearing the stories, and she enjoyed sharing them with me. And she says, "Ben, none of my kids are interested in hearing these stories at all. You're the only person that takes the time to listen to me tell these stories." And I thought, what a heavy responsibility. When Sylvia tells me these stories, when she lays these tales at my feet, if I don't choose to pick them up and carry them with me and then pass them on to the next person and share these stories with somebody else, they're lost forever. As seed savers, we're historians. We're storytellers. It's our responsibility to not only steward these bundles of life that care for us in return, but also to steward the stories and history of all the people that have cared for the seed before us. Now, when I think of seed stories, I think of it, there's multiple layers to what a seed story can be. And I visualize it almost like, let's say, an upside-down pyramid, with the broad part at the top narrowing down to a point, right? An upside-down pyramid. At the top of the pyramid, it's very broad in general. We could say the story of species, right? Let's think about the story of species. And we could say, like, okay, peppers, right? Capsicum annuum. And we could talk about the story of that species and how it was a wild food in South America, and it was domesticated in the area now known as Bolivia, and how it eventually traveled up through Central America. And we could talk about how it was brought to Europe and became such an important part of the spice trade, and how capsicum annuum then traveled the world. A similar story to that would be maybe the tomato, right? We could think about the tomato, very similar domestication story, and brought by the Europeans, and eventually the tomato traveled the whole world and had such an influence on cultures and cuisine and all these different places that it traveled. You know, a lot of times in the States, when we think about that, when we think about tomatoes, we think about Italian food, right? It's almost hard to think of Italian food without thinking of tomatoes. Tomatoes are ingrained in what we consider Italian food. But tomatoes don't come from Italy, right? No, tomatoes come from the Americas, but they were adopted in Italy. And the folks in that area really took on that plant, and they loved it, and they cared for those fruits, and they made selections, and they saved their seeds, and they really made it their own in a way. And then later, when Italian immigrants came to America, when they came back to the States, they brought their tomato seeds with them. They brought those stories with them. They brought that sense of home, that sense of place. And then tomato, full circle, traveled the world, right? So we can think about seed stories from the story of species. But you know, we're already coming, we're narrowing that down a little bit, and we can think about sense of place. When we think of seed stories, we think of sense of place. How about, for an example, we can say cowpeas, right? Okra, watermelon, right? Now those are all fruits and vegetables that when we think of them, at least for myself, I think of southern food, right? Down in the southern states. Cowpeas, black-eyed peas, right? That's ingrained in what we consider to be southern food. That's a part of that culture, that sense of place. But we know, as seed savers, that that's not where those vegetables originated. You know, cowpeas and okra and watermelon, they actually all came from Africa. And if we were to go to Africa and we were to talk to folks there that grow those vegetables, we would get different stories, different recipes, and a different sense of place. And as they save their seeds and prepare their meals, they create their own story. And when those varieties came to the States, they created new stories and a new sense of place. All right? So that could bring us a little further down the triangle. We can narrow it down a little bit more, and we could think about variety, right? The stories of varieties. And within the varieties come so many stories. We're getting near the bottom of this triangle, right? So let's think of one. We'll say, how about Radiator Charlie's mortgage lifter, right? That's a classic story. Everybody knows that one. The mortgage lifter tomato, right? And how Radiator Charlie ran his radiator shop and was at the bottom of the hill, and everybody would go up the hill, and the radiators would give out, the car would give out, and then come back down, and they have to get the radiator fixed, right? And Radiator Charlie developed this tomato called the mortgage lifter. And he sold these for, what was it, $2 a plant or something, and he was able to sell so many of them. The tomatoes were so great that he was able to pay off his mortgage, right? Legendary. So it's an interesting story about variety. But I like that story too because we could think about it in another way. You know, Radiator Charlie, well, he worked on cars, right? That's what he did. He was a mechanic. Yet he was able to develop, through a breeding project of his own at home that he developed, this new tomato, right? This prize tomato. He was able to pay off his mortgage with, right? Awesome tomato. And I like that story too. You know, it's encouraging for a home gardener, a home grower, a seed saver to think about what Radiator Charlie was able to accomplish. You know, he wasn't a scholar or a scientist by any means, but he was able at home through observation to develop this variety, a real winner too. And that's something that we can all accomplish when we save our seeds at home, when we select the traits that we appreciate and enjoy, what work best for us, for our gardening techniques, or whatever it might be. When we select traits and save seeds that reflect those traits, in essence, now we've become plant breeders. And that's encouraging for all of us, because that is something that all of us can do, and it's something that all of us have done for thousands of years. Not scientists and scholars, but anybody interested in eating food is able to do that. And that's something that we can all do as seed savers as well. So that's encouraging. Now let's move this thing down all the way to the bottom of the triangle, and we can think of this, the sense of person. This is the fine point of the triangle. The individual, you, me, all of us, right? Now, I do a lot of traveling to meet seed savers, and you know, I find myself down in the Appalachia region a lot. Wonderful folks down there. They have some wonderful people, delicious food. It's always a fun time to visit. I love it down there. And when you meet a lot of seed savers, you find that a lot of the varieties that they keep, a lot of different beans you can find down there, hundreds of different varieties of beans, and a lot of them are named for the person that saves the seed. It's been passed down, and it's just picked up the name of the original steward of that seed. And through that, we can learn the story of person. And that is something that each of us become as seed savers. When we become that person at the point of the pyramid, that individual saving and sharing the seed, we become a part of that story. And the story becomes a part of us. I'll tell you a story. One of the seeds that I've saved and shared for a long time is a black bean, a pole bean. Pretty well known. You guys surely know it. It's generally called the Cherokee Trail of Tears, black bean. Pretty common. You can get it from most seed catalogs anymore, or from your local seed library, or whatever it may be. The Cherokee Trail of Tears black bean. And I think that it's a story that we need to think about. Now, the variety gets its name from a tragic time in American history when the Cherokee people were forced from their homeland and made to march all the way to Oklahoma against their will. I'll say it again because it's worth repeating. When the Cherokee people were forced from their homeland by the American government and made to march against their will all the way to Oklahoma, it's a sad moment in American history. And if you think about the expanse of history, it really wasn't that long ago. So it's definitely something worth acknowledging. We have to acknowledge it. And the name of the bean, in a way, commemorates that moment in time and to helps us to see it and to be made to recognize it, which is important. But as seed keepers and storytellers and historians, we know that there's no way that that's what the Cherokee people called that bean. Absolutely not. Actually, the Cherokee people called that bean gunagi, which is simply the Cherokee word for black. Right? It was the black bean of the Cherokee people. And when we focus our story on that moment of European intervention, when we decide to pick up the story at that moment in time and carry it forward from there, we do no justice to the people that have saved and shared that seed for countless generations before the Trail of Tears happened. And as seed savers, it's important, the responsibility lies on us to make sure that we do true justice to all of the seed stewards that have carried these varieties forward. And we need to take these stories back to the beginning, every opportunity that we have to truly do justice to the seeds, their history, and their stories. You know, the Cherokee people brought this bean with them, of course, you know, because it was food and it was essential to their survival, the nutrition of it. But within that seed was all the songs and stories and history of their people inside of that seed. And if we don't acknowledge that when we grow that seed, when we share that seed, we're not doing our job. As seed savers and as historians, it's an important responsibility that we take on when we make that agreement with the seeds. They'll take care of us, but we have to take care of them. Now, I have another story about the Cherokee black bean that I'd like to share with you. For me, it's almost the most sentimental of all beans that I save. It was the first seed that I ever saved as a seed steward. And I want to tell you that story because I found it to be it was an inspiring moment for me, obviously, and I hope to use the story to inspire you as well. Now, many, many years ago, before I was ever a seed saver, I was a gardener, but I hadn't saved seeds. That wasn't a part of my life that I'd found yet. And we used to go to this place, my family and I. It was called the Chippewa Nature Center. And the Chippewa Nature Center, it's a nature preserve. There's 1,100 acres of trails that you can go and enjoy. And they have an old homestead, farmhouse and things, kind of a reproduction of life in the 1800s. They've got a sugar shack and a schoolhouse and an old log cabin and barn, and we would go there, my family would go there on Homestead Sundays, you know, churn butter and do all the things, and really enjoy it. And they have a heirloom garden there where they try to be as historically accurate as possible, growing varieties that they believe folks may have grown in the area in the 1800s. And I used to love to walk the garden and see the different varieties and stuff, but I didn't really understand what I was looking at. They'd have little wood burn signs at the end of the roads that would say the name of the variety, you know, in a year. So it'd say Bountiful Bush Bean, 1893, or something to that effect. And you know, I was like, I don't understand what these dates are for. And then one day I met the caretaker of the garden. Rob Maxwell was his name. I met Rob. I said, Rob, I don't understand what these signs, you know, at the end of these rows. What does this represent? So he was telling me about how they grow heirloom seeds, historically accurate heirloom seeds, and the dates on the signs represent, you know, as far back as they've been able to trace these varieties. And well, you know, sometimes I'm a little slow on picking things up, I suppose. And Rob could see that, and he reaches up into some dried bean vines and he grabs a handful of pods and he pulls them down and he puts them in my hand. And he says, "You take these seeds home, Ben. You save your seeds. You grow them next year. Then save your seeds and share them with all of your friends." All right. So I took those beans home. I kept them in a little box on my dresser, and you know, so I could keep a good eye on them. And the next year I got them out, and we prepared a little garden plot right outside the bedroom window so I could keep an eye on them. And I planted those beans right here. I took such good care of them. Boy, and they grew and they grew. To this day, I've never grown pole beans as prolific as these black beans were. They were amazing. I didn't eat any of them. I didn't eat any of them at all. We saved every seed, and like I said, they were prolific. And by the end of the season, I had a big old bag of these black beans. So I'd grown the seeds, I'd saved the seeds, now I had to share them with my friends. So we put together a seed swap. I'd never been to a seed swap before, but it was time for that, you know. And so we organized this event, and people came from all around. The first year we had 100 people showed up at this event. It was awesome. And at the end, you know, I went up on the stage with my bag of beans and told everybody the story, and I said, you guys are welcome to have beans. I need to share these with my friends, but only on the condition that you save your seeds. You share them with your friends. So everybody clamored up and got some beans, just, you know, load them up in little bags and sent them off. And at the end, my bag was empty. I'd given all the beans away, right? Oh, mission accomplished, you know. Next year we had the seed swap again. People showed up and they had their own bags of beans. And they said, Ben, I did just what you said. Saved all my seeds. What do we do next? That's when I realized the power of seed saving, right? So let's say out of all the people that took beans from me at the first seed swap, let's say 12 of them actually saved seeds and shared them with their friends, right? 12 people. And then those 12 people each share seeds with 12 more people. That's 144 people. And let's say those 144 people each shared seeds with 12 more people. How many people is that? It's a lot. It's a lot. Like a handful of beans becomes hundreds of beans. A handful of seed savers became hundreds of seed savers in just 2 years' time. The exponential growth changed my life. And I realized the power of seeds. I realized the impact that each of us could have as seed savers. I realized that every time you save and share your seeds, it's significant. So my homework for you guys is to look at the seeds that you're going to grow in your gardens this year. Look at the food on your plate and find a story. Find a story in your food. Find a story in your garden. Pick a variety, pick a species, pick a person or a place, whatever it may be, wherever on that triangle you feel comfortable. And find a story and learn it. Learn about the seeds that you're putting in the earth and the story of the place and people and history that is inside of that seed. And if you come to join us on May 2nd for the Seed School Q&A social event, maybe bring a seed story with you. If you have a story to share, bring it with you and share it with all of us. When we share our stories and we share our seeds, that's how we build community. Let's build this community together. Thank you.